Okay, let's start off. So this is the main menu of 0.2 Sprocket. I'll just go piece by piece. Scenarios is kind of the gameplay. You can choose what operation to run. They're pretty bare bones, but they're fun to do when you first start the game. Custom battle is if you have your own designs and you'd like to test them against each other. The setup is kind of complicated, but you have your attackers, your defenders. This is where you can add your vehicles. You can change the faction with this. On the right, you can change the map and some details about the weather. Sandbox and Sandbox Flat is where you generally will build your own designs. Sandbox has a little bit more going on, but Sandbox Flat is pretty good for testing like mobility because everything is flat. Showroom is just to take pictures. Create faction, these are all pretty self-explanatory. I use Sandbox Flat to start you off. I'm not going to show you the freeform, I'm just going to show you how to set up your first tank. So let's just say we want to throw a turret down. I'm going to run this without any cheats on, just that I can explain what is going on with everything. Let's start with the engine, obviously. So the engine is defined by the cylinders and the displacement. Ooh, actually first, the era is decided up here. If you're just building for fun, I recommend lateware. Unless you're trying to build something that's more relevant to lore that you've made. Late war has the best stats, things go the fastest, they end up being the coolest. So, for example, let's tune down the size of our engine, make it a V12 because those are cool. And we'll stick it in the back. Now, if you ever notice that these red symbols pop up, it's because the angle that your drive shaft meets the transmission and the engine cannot be greater than, I think, I'm going to set it to like 5 degrees. So you got to make sure that's pretty flat. There's two types of engines in the game, or transmissions. There is the clutch brake, which is the most widely used in the world during the interwar period of the 1920s. In the 1930s, it kind of got phased out, but Russia kept using it in the T-34s. Then there's also twin brake, or twin transmission. And these are generally less common. You might see them in like a Mark IV, some Russian prototype tanks, but they really are not used all that much. I prefer clutch brake, so I'm going to go ahead and use that. This out of range is just a bug, so if you see that, drag your sprocket around. This is the sprocket, it has the gearing, that'll fix it. So let's get started. We've got our transmission, our engine. They aren't properly tuned, but I'll show you how to do that later. So let's just say I have, let's just add some armor. Let me see if give myself a 30-ton tank. Alright, so first of all, I need a crew for it. Now, using these three buttons on the bottom right, you can change between the normal view, the X-ray view, and the armor view. For the X-ray view, the fourth button on the far right, you can actually choose what you want to see and what you don't want to see. But what it defaults to is usually good enough. If you see me moving stuff around, it's because on the bottom left, you can see that I've selected the move tool. I don't use these buttons, so if you see it change, it's because I use the hotkeys Q for scale, W for translate, and D for rotate. A useful button to know about is this one right here, global space. When you're translating things, if you have it enabled, it'll use the default X and Y. But if you have it disabled, it'll actually use the rotation of it to figure out the axis of movement. But I prefer using global space for this. So let's move our steering wheel further back. Of course, most tanks don't use steering wheels, only the ones later like the Panther do. But we'll go ahead and just keep it for the fun of it. So we're going to put some crew down. When you right click the crew, you can change the posture just by dragging these around. I don't know if you've ever used Blender, but it's the same thing as rigging. So let's give him a good little posture so he fits in the tank. One thing to know about is there's two types of mirror in this game. The one that you use for decorations is right here, and you'll see me turn it on and off as I'm doing stuff. I use the hotkey X. I think it's easier. One thing about Sprocket is that it doesn't mirror movements to the rigging of the crew. So if you want your guy on the left to look like the guy on the right, you've got to actually pick him up, turn mirror off, place him down. Then pick him up, turn mirror on, and you can place him again. Now you don't actually have to do this, but I think it's fun. And then we'll just give this guy something to do with his hands. There we go. So when we assign crew, we want to select the driver. Under the operates, we want to select the steering controls. And new to 0.2, we have all of these different requirements. So it says viewport missing. Let's go ahead and get him a viewpoint. That's going to be under the crew section. Under maybe it's not the crew. No, here it is. Here it is. So under equipment, this steering wheel symbol indicates that it's for the driver. And we want to give him the viewport. But I don't know if this is, he might be too far from it. Yeah, I don't like that. So I'm going to turn on the new cheat. I think it's unlimited operate. Yeah, that'll make it better. So he's still too far from it, but you know, this is a pretty inaccurate tank. If I wanted to make it accurate, I'd have to change a lot of stuff, and I don't feel like doing that. So anyways, we got a viewport for the driver, and at this moment, we can actually drive the vehicle around. But of course, the engine and the transmission aren't tuned yet, so it's not operating at maximum. So let's go back into the tank. The next thing for the whole is going to be the fuel tanks. If you go to the powertrain, under fuel tanks, you have two options. One is the external fuel tanks, and you can scale these up by holding shift and using your scroll wheel. You can rotate it using Alt, no, Q and E, that's what it is. Q and E, and you can see that it's stepped, so it's going by 15-degree increments. This button on the bottom right, whose hotkey is Control D, turns off or on the rotation snapping. So now you can see it's nice and smooth. And if you want to turn it back on, just turn the rotation snapping on. It'll automatically lock to 90. I don't like using external fuel tanks because I'm an American. And we put our fuel in the sponsons and next to the engine. As I place down the fuel tank, I'm going to use Q to select the scaling tool. And I'm going to adjust it so that it fits inside the sponsons. I forgot to turn mirror on. So let's go ahead and put some fuel tanks down. If you don't know much about tanks, about 500 to 800 liters is usually a pretty good target for the fuel capacity. And we'll leave it like that. Alright, next thing, we're going to need a turret. Turrets consist of two parts, three technically. You have the turret armor, which is decided either by freeform or the generated. You have the turret ring, and when you select the turret ring, you also select the turret basket. The turret ring is pretty self-explanatory. It's just the circle that it rotates on. You can change the diameter, that's the biggest thing about it. I'm going to leave it as it defaults because it's a perfect fit for the generated hole. You can also increase the number of basket segments. Some tanks did this, not often. Most of the times they were really just angled. So I like using one, none at all. If you'd like to do a turret or a basketless turret, just bring it down to 0 segments. And make sure you place the crew on the turret geometry. Because if you don't have the turret basket, they won't rotate with the turret. Let's give ourselves a basket. Let's make it deep, but leave space for an ammo rack underneath like the M26 Pershing. First things first, we need a mantlet. Right here is the custom trunnion. It's if you want to model your own mantlet, but for starters, just like we used to do, I recommend starting with one of these mantlets. Mantlets consist of 3 parts. The trunnion, you can see in the center. This is actually the axis of rotation. So as the gun elevates or depresses, this right here is the point at which it rotates. Anything behind, if it goes up, anything in front will go down, and vice versa. The second part is the mantlet armor. And you don't have to worry too much about this. They all have built-in armor values that you can't change unless, I think you can file edit it. If you'd like to change the armor, you have to go use your custom trunnion and then model your own mantlet. And I'll show you an example of that after. The final part is the laying drive. This is what determines the elevation, depression, and the rates at which they do so. Your turret ring also has one. The turret traverse motor is always in the back of the turret. And you can change two parts, the ratio and the torque. For the laying drive, you can only change the ratio because the torque is automatically set. I'm going to use the default values for now, just because I know they're going to fit. But let's go ahead and get a cannon going. All cannons come from the same barrel. And there's an actual auto snap feature. But you don't have to keep the breech exactly where it's placed. You can move it back and forwards depending on your size or your space limitations. Barrels consist of two parts, recoil segments and static segments. Recoil segments in the front will be pushed back when the gun fires. Static segments do not move. Since I'm kind of going for a Panther, I'm going to go ahead and set it to the 75mm. I think guns look best when they have high thickness. So I'm going to do my own thickness values. And I'm going to increase the length of my barrel. The sliders in Sprocket often go up to a maximum value. As you can see, this only goes to 1,000. But there's many times where just putting in a higher value, you can actually expand that. When you select the breech, you'll often notice this blue line. This blue line is the balance of the gun on the trunnion, and if it's too long, as you can see, the top speed is 3.6 and the time to top speed is 0.81. If I were to move it forwards and unbalance it, we can see that our top speed stays the same because the ratio is always the same, but the time to top speed increases. Since it's not too big of a deal, I'm going to keep it as it is. Next up, I'm going to add crew to the turret. The sitting posture works best for turret crew. The driver posture works best for the driver. So let's bring these guys up. Alright, we've got no clipping issues. These guys are properly set in the turret basket, and their heads do impact the roof a little bit. So let's bring them down a bit. How's that? Yeah, that works. Alright. We've got our crew set. I believe these mantlets still have built-in vision ports, but if you use a custom mantlet or one without a vision port, you'll have to go to Crew, Equipment. I take that back, it'll be under Firepower, and this piece right here, the gunner sight. And this goes down just like that. You only need one. But I believe this mantlet has a built-in gunner sight. So, gunner is always on the left for the German tanks. I'll give him the gun itself, the traverse motor, and the laying drive. And then for the other guy, I'll give him loader. If we go in, we should be able to see the gun traverses. Perfect, that's great. And it doesn't have a gunner sight anymore. So I've got to place down my own. Firepower, gunner sight, right here. And now we've got our gunner sight. But of course we've got no ammo in the tank. So let's get that. Ammo in tanks like this are often either under the basket, in the turret, or in the sponsons. I'm going to use in the sponsons, in the turret, and under the basket. The ammo rack, under the Firepower tab, is universal for all guns, and you can select the caliber by selecting the ammo rack, going up here, and then choosing the gun it's for, if you have multiple guns in the same tank. How's that? And we'll get one more. I don't know if it's let me place on the basket itself. Let's see. Ha! Okay, well that's a slight issue. So it looks like there's a bug right now where you can't place things on the turret basket itself. So instead, I'm going to bring my crew out, place them back on the roof. That's possibly a slight issue, I think. Alright, we're all seated. We all fit. Perfect. Means I need to put this here. And now we've got our ready rack. Okay. What else do we need? One thing that you might want to do is end up changing the propellant length, and that'll increase the space required by the breech, but it'll also change the penetration of the gun. If you select the barrel, you can go to muzzles under the firepower tab and add a muzzle brake if you'd like. Let's see what else. The suspension layout, yeah, this one's pretty interesting. So one of the most important things about suspension is that Sprocket doesn't do a very good job of calculating it by itself. One thing you'll almost always have to do is turn off the sync to chassis. Doing that lets you change the length of it, the separation of it. Now, of course, these German tanks, they didn't have return rollers, so I'll go ahead and turn that off. They also had a frontal transmission, but I don't feel like designing that. If I did want to, I'd have to turn this on. I'd have to move the transmission to the front, and then I'd have to rotate it 180 degrees on its head. Then, I'd have to take the engine, spin it around 180 degrees to face the front. And well, since I already went through it, no, because it intersects my ammo rack, and I don't feel like fixing that. Control Z undoes your work. Of course, I've got the out of range bug, so all I have to do is adjust the sprocket back to the rear, and we're back good to go. So the German tanks, they're interleaved, so I'll turn interleaved on. I'll turn lane sync off, because obviously it's not working very well. I want to increase the diameter of them. Yeah, how's that? And I want to decrease the diameter of my transmission, or sprocket. And let's increase the height of this. I don't want so much ground. Well, I guess, that is probably fine. Okay. But I want one less. I want less over that. And let's turn the tension down. How's that? I like it. Well, I don't like German tanks. Okay, let's decrease the width so that our interleave doesn't look so weird. Let's select the track, go to the track belt segments, and select the German. I think these are the German ones. Beautiful. Alright. There's a couple quirks, but you can play around with the values. One important thing is the torsion bars. These actually intersect what you have in a hole, so it's important to make sure that they aren't clipping in anything. You can change the angle that the suspension's at. You can also change the damper, but I don't recommend it. The arm length decides how much it juts out from the center of the vehicle, or the wheel. Something like that would probably fit pretty well. The length and the diameter are important for tuning the actual strength of the suspension. The default settings are perfectly fine though. You shouldn't have to change them. Okay, I guess it's time for tuning the vehicle itself. So, I'm going to do it my way because I think it's my way or the highway. I have a 30-ton late war vehicle. I probably want it to go about 30 miles an hour. I want to make sure I have my speed in miles an hour because je suis un Américain. First things first, I'm going to pull out my calculator and I'm going to take 92% of the safe limit, 3,900. That gives me about 3588, so I'm going to set my 3588 upshift. I do that right? Yeah, probably. Perfect. Okay. Once my upshift is set to 92% of the safe limit, I'm going to bring it down to 1 gear, go into the testing, and I'm just going to hold R until my throttle gets to 80%. What I'm looking for is the speed at the end of my first gear. I'm going to tune my transmission so that I get that to 5 miles an hour. Mine was at 3.8 something, so I'm going to decrease the ratio so it increases the top speed. Of course, doing this will decrease the torque in that first gear, but that doesn't matter. 4.6, just about. .5 ought to do it. There we go. Now that we got 5 miles an hour in the first gear, I'm just going to add 5 more gears to get to a 6-gear transmission. Doing this makes it so that I will be able to accelerate up to 30 miles an hour as long as my engine was powerful enough. And lo and behold, 30 miles an hour. And that's how I tune my transmission. Now, I could probably go faster than this, but I don't want to because tanks weren't designed to go as fast as they could. They were designed to go as fast as they should. Once I have this, the next thing I have to set is the downshift. That's as simple as going in, pressing V on your keyboard to open up the gear calculator, or the gear graph, sorry. And as you accelerate, you'll notice that the RPM drops after you upshift every gear. Mine's not dropping any further than 2800 RPM. And so I'm going to set my RPM downshift to 2800 RPM so that if it ever goes lower, it'll downshift into the lower gear. Lower gears have more torque, so you accelerate faster, but they don't have as high a top speed. And so that's why you have to actually increase gears. Idle doesn't change anything. Set it to whatever you want. See what else we got. I think that's just about it. I mean, it's simple as throwing a camo on this thing. Yeah. How's that? That screams Germany, right? Well, let me show you how to change the turret traverse. So, as you can see, it turns really slowly because, oh god, I've got a 24-second time to max. The easiest way of fixing this is changing your ratio to a lower max speed. Of course, that drops it to 10, but if you really want it to go fast, crank your torque up. It doesn't actually change anything, but it makes it turn a whole lot faster. And so now, we've got our tank. One big thing is if you notice that your tank doesn't turn very fast while it's stationary, you want to go into your transmission and increase the first gear. Mine turns perfectly fine, so I'm not going to make any changes to it, but that's just something to keep your eye out for. Reverse gears work much in the same. Most tanks have a really high reverse gear, so they don't go very fast, but they're able to back out easily if they get stuck on something. One big mistake beginners make is adding a ton of gears to their transmission. The number of gears doesn't change anything except for acceleration, but after about 6, 7, 8 gears, you actually start getting diminishing returns on the acceleration. All you're doing is increasing the width of the transmission, and by the same logic, the amount of weight required to create the space that allows you to have that big of an engine, or transmission. Keeping your transmission with low gears helps increase the weight, helps increase the size. Also makes it look prettier. I think that's just about it. Everything else is mostly decoration. Yeah, that is it. One important distinction is the turret versus add-on. Once you get kind of situated and start freeforming, an add-on is used whenever you don't need a turret ring. and I'll load up my project that I'm working on currently. As you can see, don't worry about him. As you can see though, all of these little pieces are made using add-on. They're really, really useful for decorations. But once I actually need to place a turret, I use the turret structure, and they work the same as add-ons. Of course, you just have to go into freeform edit, and you can see you start with the same cube, or same square, as if I were to use an add-on, and do the same thing. Just one has a turret ring. That's the only difference. I think that's just about it. Well, let me know if you have any more questions, and I'm going to go ahead and get this uploaded.